Good morning, everyone. Really nice to be together. So, my name is Gabe, Keller Flores, and I'm the office manager at Common Ground and one of our Dharma teachers. And I'm filling in for Mark this morning. He's leading the Labor Day retreat with Shelley. Really happy to be here with everyone in this virtual way, but still feeling just appreciative of our community and taking this time to practice together and to reflect together on this really beautiful path. So we'll start, I believe this group starts with a chant, so we'll do that. I just put it in the chat, but I'll put it in again. We'll be doing the Buddha's words on loving kindness, which is page 28, and you can find that on our chant book. And I'll chant, and you're all welcome to chant at home, but it's better to stay muted. Otherwise, it gets a bit cacophonous. So just settling in, finding the chant. Now let us chant the Buddha's words on loving kindness. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm, and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety may all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child. So with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. So letting the words fade, maybe feeling a resonance with this invitation to abide in a heart of goodwill as we settle into our meditation. Taking our time before rushing into any idea of being the meditator, picking up a meditation technique, to just arrive and appreciate the natural settling process, going from a more active, conceptual mode of being to a simpler, more direct interest in the way it is, the experience of the mind and body here and now. And we want to start with a fresh beginner's mind. However, we can access that. And one of the easiest ways to remember how to be mindful is just to tune in to this natural settling process in the body. Immediately when we turn our attention to the body, it's a reminder that the body has its own field of sensation, energy, pain and pleasure, pressure, tingling, ease and discomfort, settledness and agitation. And that the mind is capable of being intimate, of knowing, tuning into this field of sensation and energy. And that in those moments when the mind is in a pure way interested just in being close, in feeling and welcoming and accepting the different sensations of the body, we can tune into a kind of pleasure, the pleasure of being mindful, of not being caught in the habitual ways that we tend to get caught in the mind. And just this can be a source of confidence. It's not complicated in the way that we mostly think of our lives as complicated. There's nothing to figure out for now, nothing to solve, but there is a body and there is a mind that has this capacity so direct that we rarely appreciate it, give it attention, are interested in it. This capacity to be aware, to be sensitive and close, to be aware as opposed to being unaware, lost. To know what is being known. And the objects of awareness, sensations, thoughts, moods, energy in the body, memories. For the purpose of meditation, the objects of awareness aren't so important. What's important is the meditating mind. Does the mind have awareness? Is it balanced, relaxed? Is it interested? Is it sustaining awareness or just aware intermittently? Is there aversion, greed, delusion in the mind? What is being known by the mind? So these are questions that can pique the mind's interest, remembering that we're meditating, and in this activity, we can put aside, to whatever extent possible, our preferences, our opinions about the different objects of awareness, and instead practice with the viewpoint that all objects of awareness are just nature, not personal, following their own nature. And we can focus on the meditating mind, developing wholesome qualities. Of course, it's okay to direct the mind to some aspect of experience that maybe you've been practicing with and have a sense of comfort and familiarity with. The mind knows how to pay attention there and how to put other things down and settle. So if that's the case, then of course, just follow your intuition about what will support the mind coming into balance and being interested in its awake, sensitive nature, putting aside what's superficial, not necessary right now. So let's continue now in silence. Doing the best we can to sustain mindful awareness and a relaxed attitude that allows objects of awareness to come and go, doing the best we can and letting that be good enough. And for the last few minutes of the sit, you might want to practice with your eyes open, letting go of directing the mind to any particular object, sitting right in the middle of our experience, and noticing that awareness can continue on its own. So we'll transition to a more active form. Thanks for your practice. And let's just take a minute or two to stretch, get some water. Appreciate being together. Feel free to scroll and look at the beautiful faces here. So nice to be together, and nice to be here with you. For those who don't know me, my name is Gabe, Keller Flores. I'm the office manager at Common Ground and one of our Dharma teachers, and I'm filling in for Mark today as he's leading the Labor Day retreat with Shelley. And we're just going to pick up where Mark left off. We've been going through the paramis, this list of 10 beautiful qualities, virtues, and we're on to truthfulness today. So that's what I'll be speaking about. And yeah, it was timely. I've been thinking about it myself in my own life and practice. And we had a conversation about it at the millennials group that I lead last week. And so, yeah, there's a lot here, even though it can seem simple on the surface. And the way I'll share some thoughts on it is dividing into two aspects. One, you could say, is more external, and the other more internal. So truthfulness as a virtue we cultivate in our speech primarily, although I think you could extend that to even energetically, just how we show up. So the two are obviously related, but in the most obvious way, being truthful with our speech is a really important training in Buddhism. And then the second is truthfulness in our perceptions, which is really at the core of our mindfulness practice, getting clear, being more real with ourselves, and being humble about how deluded we are, and willing to learn, to be learners, and to see what we're not seeing. And so there's a commitment and a value of truthfulness there that really is at the center of our practice. So with the first, on the level of speech, we can probably all agree that truthfulness is a virtue, and it has, I'm sure we all do our best to be honest with others. And I certainly um, think of myself as someone who really holds this value highly. And yet, I think one of the reasons I was just reflecting on this in my own life and practice recently is just noticing a lot, in particular in a new relationship. Um, yeah, just how easy it can be to not be completely truthful, and how hard it can be to be truthful. Um, so first, let's reflect a little on why this is a value. What are the benefits of truthfulness in our relationships, and then we'll look a little bit at some of the reasons we may not be truthful, or why it can be hard to be truthful, and look at, yeah, what, just to be real. And I'll in giving this talk, I want to be as truthful as I can, obviously, as a practice. So I'll share a little bit from my experience, and maybe it will resonate with yours. But looking at some of the benefits of truthfulness, this commitment, this value of truthfulness in our relationships, um, yeah, I think we could probably all reflect on moments, at least, where even though it may have seemed hard um, to be honest with somebody, maybe about um, something that was difficult to talk about, but then the relief that can come, and sort of the sense of being having things out in the open, being on the same page, or even things that we can be afraid of and imagine, and then once we actually put it on the table, bring it up, it's often not what we fear or what we imagine. So just that value I've been finding, and it's a very gradual process, and I feel very much a beginner in some ways, just of that kind of directness and clarity, and um, especially when there's something a little bit unpleasant or a little difficult, and it would be easier, you know, to tell a little lie, or just to not be completely honest. Even something as simple as "How are you?" and how often are we not completely honest? And I think it's, yeah, it's what I've been really interested in, is just all these ways that we justify not being honest, not being real, and not, again, to like um, judge that, but just to be interested in it, and to be interested in the ways we might justify it kind of unconsciously, and assume there's no way that I could be honest in this situation. And maybe there is, and it just requires some creativity, or um, yeah, just looking at how we show up in a real way, and what that feels like, what the impacts of that are like, and what it feels like when we're not showing up in a real way. And yeah, for me, it's very clear when I'm honest with myself, and when I look at it, even in the really subtle ways. You know, yeah, like again with that example of someone asking how I am, just the difference between like just that little move where I really don't want to get into it, or and so it's just fine, and just how it really, there's not a lot of room there for any real connection, because um yeah, and again, it's not to judge, because the heart's just trying to take care of itself. But I've been, yeah, and getting some feedback from one friend, just about how that does cut off any possibility of connection. And so even if I'm in a bad mood and I don't want to get into it, well, there's the possibility of at least being real about that, and just how that, just being real, yeah, I'm in a bad mood and I don't want to talk about it, or however we might express it, each in our own way. But for me, it's more an energetic sort of like, no matter how what's going on. And I think this is really related to the second piece about just truthfulness in our perception, and sort of the value of truthfulness, the value of being intimate with life, however it is, of just like, um, yeah, however it is, for a moment I can show up recognize, oh, this is how it is, feeling horrible, and like, and then somehow not needing to pretend about that or not needing to disguise that, and finding what's appropriate in the moment of how to share that, express that, or be real about that. I mean, it can even be just like a look, or just like, it doesn't even have to be verbal, but some way of like owning that this is the experience. And it's not always possible, and that's okay. It's not about judging ourselves. I think for me, it's more just this curiosity and this interest about what the actual impact and effects are when we choose, or the mind chooses kind of habitually to not be honest, to not be real, and how it feels when we are real. So let's look at some of the reasons that we might hold back from telling the truth. And so I just have a few, and I'm sure there's many more. But I found this interesting and useful to reflect on, because I think, like I was saying earlier, that yeah, we justify it, and maybe we haven't looked that carefully at the reasons we justify it or what's going on there, and that there may, and not, and to like understand that there's nuance there. I mean, one thing maybe just to start with is the Buddha's guidelines for wise speech, and truthfulness is always there. So truthfulness is sort of a non-negotiable, which is interesting because again, we may, yeah, we often do, I think, feel justified in not telling the truth, even in very subtle ways. But for the Buddha, that was really important. But there was also other factors that make speech wise speech and skillful speech. So it's not just that it's truthful. And I think that's important because we can also use the truth, or what we think of as the truth, being truthful. I'm just being really honest with you. But but we're doing it to harm, for instance. So that's one of the other qualities that's um, expected, or that's the high standard that the Buddha sets out. Let me just find those qualities. Yeah, so it's a speech that is truthful, helpful, spoken with a mind of goodwill, and spoken at the right time. So there's a lot of factors there. So it's not, this isn't simple. It's not it requires mindfulness and really being sensitive, to the situation and the person and ourselves and where we're coming from. So I feel like this is such a deep and yeah, really, really interesting area for practice, and one where we're always going to be making mistakes. So it's not about being perfect, but I think these high standards can really inspire us to look, just to be honest and look at our speech and the impacts that it has, and yeah, so we can learn about ourselves and our minds, and we can have a better chance of um, having our words land, be received, and be a cause for connection and understanding. So one of the reasons I think sometimes we're not honest with other people is we're afraid of hurting somebody, and I think that's an appropriate fear, and because our words can cause harm, and it's very easy to cause harm with our words, as we all know. So that's why I think the Buddha has those high standards, and to really reflect before we're about to say something. Is this truthful first? Is it helpful? Or am I just, trying to hurt someone, or, get my way or be right? Is it spoken with the mind of goodwill? I think that's a really interesting one, where it can be true. We can think, oh yeah, this person really needs to hear that. But when we look at our intention, is it really coming from goodwill, or is it coming from wanting to cause harm, put someone in their place? And is this the right time? We may feel a lot of urgency in a moment, but if we're really sensitive, take a moment, tune into where the other person's at, it may not be the right time. And then maybe we say, do you have time later to talk or go for a walk or something? Yeah, but this fear of hurting someone, I think, even if we followed all of those high standards, what we say could still cause harm or could still hurt someone. But we're mostly responsible for, our intentions, that it's not to cause harm and that we're really checking that. No, this really, this is, impacting our relationship. And I feel like it would be helpful to bring it up, and it helpful to me and to the other person to know this. And it will probably cause, it will probably hurt because it's maybe an uncomfortable truth. Um, but we all probably know, if we reflect just on the harm that can come from not addressing what needs to be addressed. So I think this is one way we can avoid being real with people, is not wanting to rock the boat, to hurt someone else. But I think we can sort of take refuge in our intentions, and to really check them, that, you know, I'm doing this out of, as best I can tell, good intentions. And so even though it may hurt, I'm going to be here in a compassionate way for the conversation, for what unfolds. And so we don't have to avoid, even though, yeah, it's hard, but we don't have to avoid what can really be causes for healing and repair, and deeper understanding, when we can talk about um, things that might be difficult or uncomfortable. And then another reason we may not be completely honest, this is one I think I've noticed a lot recently, is not wanting to reveal the less agreeable aspects of our personality, or really reveal what's going on for us. Um, yeah, like in the example of how are you, and you know, yeah, we all want to. At least I have the conditioning of wanting to always be happy, positive, and yeah, just to be real. No, I'm not feeling well, feeling down, and then so just that vulnerability, or whatever it might be, or revealing all the, yeah, if we really, we're honest in different moments with people, it takes a lot of vulnerability and trust, to reveal in our closer relationships, what really goes on. The pettiness, the anger. But I think, yeah, this is the basis for trust, and intimacy, where we can reveal, that we are a conditioned, imperfect being. And I think this goes hand in hand with our own understanding and perception of the conditioning of our minds, where we, over time, with mindfulness practice, see our minds more clearly, see everything that's there, the beautiful qualities and the unskillful qualities, and over time take it less personally, because we understand that it's conditioned. It's not like we decided to have this personality, and it's lawful. It's nature. It's cause and effect. And so, in our mindfulness practice, we can start to have a little more space and humor, and I think that then is similar and translates into how we can be real with each other about what comes up for us. We get triggered or whatever, and allows us to communicate that in more truthful ways and less harmful ways, where we're taking responsibility for the condition of our mind. I mean, not that we're completely in control of it, but we understand that uh, what comes up for us is a conditioned response due to the particular conditioning of our minds. And um, we don't assume that we have the whole picture, and so we're willing to just be real about the conditioning of our minds. And I think of nonviolent communication as one model for how we can practice communicating in this more truthful way. In nonviolent communication, which I haven't studied a lot, but but one of the basic frameworks is just to sort of um, describe sort of in a blow by blow way, very similar to how we practice perceiving things in with mindfulness practice, like when you did this, when you said this, I felt that, and then you can say because I value this. And so we're really taking responsibility for our own responses, reactions, while still being real about, how things unfold. Yeah, and in my experience, uh, yeah, even if it's embarrassing, but there's a certain freedom in just putting things out there when there's that perspective that, I may understand even that this is unskillful, that this response that's coming up for me is unskillful, and I'm not encouraging it, but because you seem interested, I'm sharing this with you, and it's a vulnerable thing, and yeah, in a relationship where there's trust to receive that, there can be, yeah, it can actually, and this is, I think the value of therapy and just good friends where we can share the less agreeable aspects of our personalities, just that reflection and that, and we do that here in our Dharma community where people just share what's real for them. And it's so, sure you've experienced, it's so grounding and freeing to take all that stuff of our minds less personally and see how it isn't personal, how it's, you know, it's, it's just human nature. So that's one that's, it's not easy, um, but can really, yeah, be a cause for freedom and for healing, I think. And then another reason we may not tell the truth, and I think this is really common, and um, yeah, one of those things we may not want to see about ourselves, but just how often we bend the truth, just in really little ways, probably, but to advantage ourselves, to be right, or to get out of doing something, or just to paint ourselves in a better light. And there's research on this, cognitive science research on this, just about the bias we have towards ourselves, you know. And like one study I read about, they'll have a story of, some disagreement between people, and they'll have people imagine themselves the same scenario as, either the so-called victim or the so-called, um, aggressor or whatever person who made a mistake. And just depending on which role you take, people had very different perceptions of the situation and who was at fault. And yeah, it just our very deep bias to take our own side, to want to be right. This is so basic, we may not reflect on it very often, but I mean, I notice myself doing this all the time. And it's like mostly it's not big things, but just to see how willing my mind is to bend the truth a little, to paint myself in a better picture, or to get what I want. It's really humbling. And and in the big scheme, how this plays out, in our society. And so definitely something I think to be aware of, and just to be real with. And it's we can be real about this tendency to not be real, because we may have the idea, like I do, that I really value truthfulness, and then that idea can even, you know get in the way in a way, or be something that, when we look a little more closely, or in certain situations, we see, oh, there's more there, more to the story. So I think all that can just maybe, hopefully, just spark some curiosity. And again, it's not about judging or being perfect, but just some curiosity about this value of truthfulness, and that the Buddha really seemed to hold really highly, and to yeah, just be curious about the ways that we may bend the truth, and and to see what would it be like, what other possibilities, what creativity might we need to call on in certain situations where it's like, I want to be truthful, but there's these other factors. I can't divulge all the information. It's not appropriate. Um, Whatever it might be, or there's a lot going on for me. I don't feel like I can open my mouth without, causing harm. But how can we be truthful, be real? And I feel sometimes like it comes, the speech is the outward representation or manifestation, but it's like, I think it starts with our own being and, in any given moment, how connected, in tune we are with ourselves and where we're coming from and how comfortable we are with that, however it might be, even if there's unskillfulness present or something, but there can be some understanding, this is what's going on. This is how the degree to which I understand it. And then when we're called upon to engage or speak, we have then some grounding, some relationship with what's going on that we can speak from. And that, I think, allows us to keep our hearts open, which I think is the really important thing, where we don't have to deceive. We don't have to, we can, and there's such beauty in that and release and relief. And I think we feel that when we're around people who are present in that way, real in that way. There's just a sense of really, yeah. And I think this, again, is really related to just our mindfulness practice of really being in the moment. Yeah, that's really liberating and points the way to freedom, where we don't have to pretend, we don't have to be in conflict with the way things are, no matter how it is. We can have a working relationship with reality. So in the time remaining, I'll talk a little bit more about the second aspect of truthfulness and the value of truthfulness, which is the truthfulness in our perceptions. And again, a lot of room for humility here about, yeah, just on really fundamental levels, how we misperceive and how that causes suffering. And this is really the core of the Buddha's teachings, is that our suffering comes from misperceptions, comes from misunderstanding and then grasping in ways that cause suffering due to that misunderstanding, that misperception. So there's a list of 4 misperceptions that are really fundamental. And this is called the vipalasas, or distortions. And they are: number 1, sensing no change in the changing. So perceiving things as permanent, which are actually impermanent. Sensing pleasure in what's suffering, or we could say sensing satisfaction, perceiving satisfaction in what's unsatisfactory. Number 3 is assuming self where there's no self. And number 4 is sensing the unlovely as lovely. So these are probably familiar. Sometimes the first 3 go under the name of the 3 characteristics. And I think it's useful to think of these as perceptions, ways that we perceive reality. And so in that way, they're a bit more fundamental, more basic, more close than just viewpoints. Because if we think about it, we think about impermanence, anything we might assume is permanent, and then we think about it, logically, we understand that it's not. And so there's a limit to how much benefit can come just from thinking about these on a conceptual level. And so I think the real liberation, and really what keeps us clinging, which is really the point, isn't that it's not a logical thing. It's a way the heart is sort of looking for ground and orienting and emotionally attaching to something, as being permanent. or like when something isn't going our way, there can be that sense that this is going to last forever, even though if we thought about it, we know that it isn't. So it's for the first one, for sensing no change in the changing. I think it's more about how we tend to just perceive reality, and mostly how we tend to perceive reality is in terms of thoughts and concepts and stories, which there's not a lot of change. We don't perceive a lot of change in that. When we think of me, Gabe, there's something that feels pretty solid and lasting there. Or think about, whatever it is, other people in our lives. We tend to not, think of them as a constant change, but oh yeah, they're like this. And I think with all of these, it's important to think about them as pragmatic and not so much as metaphysical, or trying to come to some conclusion about the nature of reality, but really to notice what are the effects of perceiving things as static. This is never going to change. I mean, how often do we have thoughts like that, even though we know logically it's not true? This is never going to change. It's always going to be like this. I'm always this way. She's always this way. And so it's more of just our habitual, and this is just how our minds, when they're really oriented around concepts and trying to look for grounding concepts and think of our life as, okay, I have this life now and I want that, and just how we organize things with thought. But we're not really, but there's a solidity there that that basically we get caught on and cling to, and it causes suffering. Um, and this is something to investigate. Again, so it's about investigating the effect on our heart of these different ways of perceiving, of tuning in, of thinking about reality, of what we think of as real, um, how we orient our hearts to this swirl of experience that we call life. And so this perception of impermanence or inconstancy is really, in my experience, what really can be liberating about it isn't thinking about, oh yeah, autumn's coming. I mean, that can be helpful, and just to notice our attachment to summer and to see that. And there are reflections on this grosser level, just the fact of aging and death. So there's definitely, on the conceptual level, there definitely is, and just how amazing it is that we can be surprised by old age and death, when in some ways it's so obvious, but it's something that the mind, doesn't want to think about most of the time. But on a more direct level, the perception of inconstancy, moment to moment, just the flow of experience, of thought, emotion, mood, and what that sense of flow of the mind not being so caught in any particular experience or perception, but more attuning to whatever it is that's moving, that it's moving, that things keep coming and going, that there's pain, there's pleasure, but that in a sense, it's not worth clinging to, because then we sort of step out of that flow and we miss the heart's opportunity to be resting in a more peaceful relationship to that flow. So that's one way of describing the benefit of that perception. We just keep meeting life, as opposed to taking a break to scheme about life. We just stay. We just keep attuning and keep keeping our sensitive hearts open, and to the changing perceptions and impacts and impressions. And speaking of the passage of time, I only have 4 more minutes, so I'll just do a cursory overview of the next 3. So the second one is sensing pleasure in suffering. So this misperception, or sensing satisfaction in what's unsatisfactory. And I think this is very fundamental to just how desire works and how we tend to orient around. Again, they're all interrelated. So how we tend to orient around concepts when we are perceiving them as fixed, not changing, personal, and then there's the idea, oh yeah, that is going to do it. And so that idea of that, whether it's ice cream or whether it's a relationship or whether it's being done with some project, but that idea of some sense experience, and then really grasping that as this is going to really deliver. And this is just, how desire works, and it's very natural. But when we are more honest, we see that attachment, it sort of has expectations that are never quite filled, because there are pleasant experiences and they pass, and then we want more. And this isn't to judge experiences, because we all know experiences can be nice and pleasurable. So it's not a problem or a deficiency in experience. It's more in that hungriness of the mind that is looking for, this experience is really going to do it. And then we're disappointed. And so that's the suffering in that misperception, is that disappointment and the clinging and the building up. And so just that orientation of the mind towards, I'm going to get this thing or get rid of this thing, and that's really going to do it, as opposed to just reflecting on that clinging itself here in the moment and seeing what kind of freedom might be available here and now, even as there is this desire or this aversion. And then the third, assuming self where there's no self. So this one, it's so basic. I think it's a rare moment, at least for me, where there's some perspective, just seeing that perception, seeing that way of organizing things, because it's so habitual. It's often, we don't usually recognize it because we're so used to it. But I think we can have moments where that's less the orientation. There's more of a sense of flow, a sense of just things unfolding, just participating in a flow. And there's just less self-centeredness, less self-consciousness, orientation around me at the center. And we can train in this perception, whatever's unfolding, seeing it as nature, even the impulses, the intentions that arise in the mind. And then noticing what the difference between how that feels and how it feels where there's more of this solid sense, oh yeah, me. What does it feel like when there's a really strong sense of me? You might check out whether there's clinging there, whether there's fixedness there, suffering there, or whether there's ever this sense of me that really feels easeful, at rest, completely at peace, and that there's me there at the center, or whether the moments of peace and ease, flow, there's less of a clear sense of me, and what those experiences, those perceptions feel like. And then just a word on the last one, sensing the unlovely as lovely. And this falls under the second one of sensing satisfaction and what's unsatisfactory. But it's presented as its own standalone. And I think it's traditionally interpreted as having a lot to do with just our tendency to see human bodies as attractive and have that perception, and the strong clinging and that can arise from that clinging and suffering. And just to understand that that is a perception, and it's genetically conditioned and it's culturally conditioned, and it's very superficial. It's like the outward appearance of the body, and the mind can latch onto that image. And so there's practices of remembering that, remembering the less attractive elements of the body, just as a way to balance that if that's out of balance. That how attractive is the blood in our veins and the guts in our stomach, and it's not to judge the body. It's not meant to be. It's just meant to show that it's a conditioned perception, and it can be quite habitual. Just that superficial perception of the body as attractive, our own body or someone else's, and all the energy we put into that, and just balancing that. Oh, this is just a form. So I want to leave it here. So there's just to respect everyone's time, and to leave time for small groups. I see Shannon here. Are you leading the small groups today? Okay, thank you. So let's just take a breath together. Really appreciate everyone's kind attention. Maybe just letting go of the words and resting back into our own experience for a second. So dedicating whatever goodness has come from our time together to the benefit of all beings. May all beings be free from suffering and free from the root causes of suffering. So I'm going to stop